Today, we're going to have the president of the society, Paul Pangaro, talking about an initiative that he's been working on even before he became president, because it's a big undertaking, the new Macy initiative. And as you know, this is going to be somewhat interactive as well. And we are happy to have Paul here. And I would like to turn the chair over to him, please.
Thank you very much, Pile. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone from all around the world. Thank you for coming. I come to you today in part as president, but more so as a participant in the event today. As Pile said, this is about the new Macy initiative. And in particular, as you've seen from the invite that you've received and responded to, we're exploring the urgent questions in response to today's AI. I'll put that air quote around it quite a lot. So we'll be sharing in the chat a variety of links along the way to show things to look at, other materials, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll get to the substance of it in a minute. Just a few logistical things first. First of all, I want to thank all my colleagues in the new Macy initiative who've collaborated, many of whom you'll be seeing in real time today, and also the advisory council of the new Macy, some of whom are also thankfully here today. And also to thank Jude Lombardi and Pilar Bunel of the ASC for asking us that we might present new Macy today in the opening of the new series. A couple of interactive ideas, which we'll interweave in the course of the session today. I'd like to ask my colleague, Michael Munton, to say a few words about this and perhaps share screen and show how it might work. It's an attempt to get a little beyond the limitations of the digital and the fact that we're not sharing the same space in our biological selves, but rather sharing across the divide of digital. Michael, could you say a few things?
Of course. Thank you, Paul. I'll be putting the link to this Miro board in soon, but I'd just like to do a quick run through here. So the thoughts and ideas that we gather here today will help inform the direction of future new Macy meetings. At the end of this meeting, we'll have a vote in Miro to better understand which questions and ideas seem most pertinent to the group. Some of you may be familiar with Miro already. It's a virtual whiteboard that allows us to collaborate in real time. On the left side of the screen, you'll see a small white toolbar. The fourth icon down is the sticky note. We'll be using the sticky notes to share ideas, thoughts, examples, and follow-up questions. To create a note, you can also left-click 3 times, and that's just a nice little shortcut. For convenience, the questions can be located at the very top of the boards. A large black arrow will indicate which question is currently being discussed, and every question has its own board, as you can see. And below the 6 main boards, there's a space for practice drawing or drafting ideas. It's just sort of a scratch board that you can use. You aren't required to use it, but you may if it's helpful. And then if you need assistance, you can message Adler or me to help you with technical problems related to Miro during the meeting. So I'll now post the Miro board in the chat. You can click on it and it will open in your browser unless you have the app installed already.
Great, Michael, thanks very much. And thanks for all the configuration there, we appreciate it. Also, you see the Zoom chat. Please feel free to interact with each other, propose questions, preferably marked as question, but if not, we have some folks who are monitoring the chat for that purpose. I do ask that you confine your comments in the chat to the topic at hand. Sometimes it goes off the reservation. We'd like to try to stay focused if possible. If you want to respond to somebody specific, you can say @name. So if you're responding to somebody who's further up in the list of messages as they fly by. Also, the hashtag #NewMacy is also something you may wish to use in social media. And the @NewMacyMeetings is a recent Twitter account that we just started. But let's get to it. Let me share my screen, and you'll see in the chat may have scrolled up a little bit, under urgent questions, we've shared this slide deck that I'm about to show you. And the advantage of clicking directly on the slide deck is that you can see a series of links and other materials that can be linked to from here. So this is our opening page, real-time Miro board. So that's a way also, if you go directly to this slide deck. There's new Macy related links that we'll be talking about, the event description that brought you here, and indeed, in general, the new Macy hashtag, Twitter account with hashtags. So why are we here? How did we come here? What's our purpose today? Forgive me if I spend a few minutes going over a short history of New Macy, because I think it's important. We're a little bit down into it now, and I want to zoom out very, very slightly. So these were the provocations of today, the two on the left, how to create more analog and organic frameworks and what forms, etc. You can read that on your own. These came out of a series of real-time presentations. Can somebody see who's not on mute? Unmute them, please. So these provocations, kind of in the middle of I want to give you some history and then move forward in the event itself. So to recenter, how did we get here? We started back in March of 2020 because at the moment of COVID, clearly there were an enormous number of pandemics that were coming up. These pandemics were many, obviously the COVID pandemic, but upon reflection, one can see many things as pandemical. Pan meaning all, demic meaning demos, the same root as democracy, meaning of the people. So that which affects all of the people. And at that time, we started a series of conversations. There were a series of one-on-ones, there was a presentation I gave, et cetera, and there are some links about this to follow. But the image that came to my mind was the idea of new Macy meetings. Now, in brief, many of you know the origin of cybernetics is in the 1940s and 1950s, partly through the Wiener book of the same name, Cybernetics, but more so, I would claim, by the conversations that came through the Macy meetings themselves, which were a series of conferences that were held from 45 to 53. And in that moment of those 1940s and 1950s, there was the awareness that this was a seminal moment, that there was something big that could be done. There was an idea that was arising. It happened to be, in that case, cybernetics. And I felt at the moment in March of 2020 with the pandemic that perhaps the moment had arrived again. So with the pandemics of biology, COVID, and technology, and racism and inequality, and the environment and the economy, and those not even mentioned, cybernetics surely has something to offer to these challenges. Cybernetics about complex adaptive systems in a world that's unpredictable and indeed unknowable. And of course, with cybernetics also comes the seminal concern for purpose. Our purpose? Whose purpose? Ours? Who's our? Who decides? Who decides? What do we address? How do we address it? And so on. So this was daunting, audacious, maybe quixotic also, to imagine that cybernetics would come to this call from COVID to approach pandemics. And the Macy meetings occurred to me because, of course, they're part of the ethos of the history of cybernetics, but also because a few had been calling for a new Macy or next Macy meetings, most notably Andy Pickering, who has written eloquently and persuasively. He's author, you will know, of The Cybernetic Brain. He's here today and we'll offer some perspectives later. But how do we then invoke the new Macy meetings in a way that is both respectful and brings forward some plan of action, not just conversations, but action? So with all of the above, the idea of new Macy conversations was begun, but quickly it became clear that the community that we were and are and hope to grow to would do well to begin with a focus on something bounded, something more in our province, and then later expand to see whether we can go to those broader situations of economics or capitalism or environment or racism, or these are obviously all very, very critical. But what's in our wheelhouse? Well, it's kind of obvious. The wicked challenges of today's AI. So these powerful tech platforms, yes, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, keep going. All of these have been bending our thinking and influencing our lives, the lives of billions of people, as it turns out, if you believe the statistics, and I do. So why cybernetics? Well, cybernetics came before AI. Neural nets were originated by cyberneticians. AI, as a name, was named in reaction to cybernetics as a counter. So cybernetics, about the purpose embedded in system or observed in systems, make us conscious of our own biological, social, individual purposes, intentions as humans. How do we focus on those things? How do we, as an initiative, as a new Macy conversation initiative, go forward? Well, we've been busy. We've written some works. You can refer to these individually. I don't want to go on too long. I recommend them. In the chat now, you'll see a link to this page, which in turn will lead you to all of these individually. Have a look. So in this history from March of 2020 to present, we've had a series of interactions, many one-on-one, some bi-weekly, some in invited talks in small groups, some in larger keynotes and so on, but all the way trying to bring a focus and going beyond just conversations. So how do we have a positive effect in the context of the pandemic of today's AI, the problems that AI brings up? And there's a summary article there, number 4, for example, is a position paper that goes into depth, that tries to analyze why we believe AI and the digital logic of it is having a negative effect. What is it about digital thinking that overcomes developers, entrepreneurs, and profit-making corporations to make such an incursion in our daily lives, into our nervous system, so to speak, not literally, I hope not ever, but figuratively for sure. So what became our focus was to bring forward alternatives to the algorithms, not just to say these are bad and we need ethics. A lot of folks are doing that better, I think, surely than I can. Ethics is not my province. But how could we find alternatives to today's AI that already exist in art and media? Surely there are alternative ways of interacting with human beings than recommendation engines and the other digital ilks. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. The list of links will find you how we articulate those things. So how do we find these alternatives to the pernicious algorithms that are inside of today's AI? And how would we indeed develop and design them ourselves? From what principles? And this is where we ended up with a contrast between the left side here in red and the right side. We argued a lot about these. We spent a lot of time going back and forth. Well, what about it's a fantastic conversation and fantastic dialectic. And there were many variations of this particular diagram. But in the end, I think, as a simplification, I hope not an oversimplification, the left is somewhat digital and the right is analog, and we need both, right? We're not going to remove the digital from our daily lives, and the digital is efficient, it's effective, it's predictive, it has all of these positive aspects to it. But the right side is more, forgive this simple way of saying it, is more us. We are analog, right? We are fluid, we are open-ended, we are ambiguous, and so on. So is there a relationship across the analog and the digital such that we can get to a better place and influence the design and development and deployment of digital systems that we now think of as only digital? Can we move toward an analog framework and an analog interactivity? This is the vision, this is where we are. More specifically, interaction can be thought of left side and right side. Information, intelligence, all of these can be thought of as distinguished and disparate and dichotomous, or we can bring cybernetics together as a kind of bilingual sensibility. So this is the idea here. And this brings us to today. This brings us to the urgent questions. we sent out a call of this form to the community, and we asked anyone who cared to respond. And now we have a half dozen people. I assume that they are here. We'll call on them one by one. They don't know the order. And we will ask them to speak to their urgent questions. So in this context of the analog and the digital and the issues of the world, some zoomed in, some zoomed out. So there'll be a wide range of responses here. But let's now go one by one. Dee, I'm going to ask you to say how you'd like to run the timer for this. You could unmute for a second and speak, and then we'll proceed one by one.
Excellent. Hello there. Hi. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Hi, I'm Dean Chapman, and I'm from down under, Canberra, Australia, and I'm going to be your friendly, or maybe not so friendly, timekeeper. So what I've got here is my mobile phone, and I've set it for 2 minutes. So you have up to 3 minutes, but 2 minutes the bell will go. And so that 2 minute mark basically signals that you have 1 minute to go.
Dee, excuse me, Dee, you're a little hard to hear. Can you be close?
Can you hear this? Can you hear this?
That's a bit better, yes. That's a bit better. Yeah, thank you.
Right, okay. So, yes, so basically, did you hear that, that at the 2 minute mark that you will get a bell that will ring, which will basically signal that you've got 1 more minute to go. And then at the 3 minute mark, you must stop. So whether you're in mid-word, mid-sentence, mid-paragraph, you must stop. And that's basically how the timing will go. And then I'll hand back across to Paul to introduce the next question.
Great.
So that's how it's going to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. It's a little hard to hear still. I don't know whether it's because you're coming from all the way around the globe, but thank you for being timekeeper. The gist is, as has been put in the chat, this timer will start. You'll have 2 minutes. You'll hear an alarm from Dee, and then you'll have another minute, and then we'll ask you to stop promptly such that we can keep going. Okay, Mark Sullivan, can you unmute and give us your question and how you would ask us to think about it?
Sure. Hello, everybody. So the question, as you see, is can we develop a new digital analog model vis-a-vis what Paul said about today's AI, an alternative that would support an AI that would help us leverage human agency to address the wicked problems facing us locally and globally. So agency was the key concept with this. I'm sure everybody's heard of wicked problems, and we hear about them continuously. And as Paul mentioned, COVID was yet another wicked problem. And I would actually submit, which I think is implied in some of the things Paul said, that AI, today's AI itself, has become a wicked problem. And that part of the thought behind this question is that it's no longer enough to correct the deficiencies of today's AI. Several authors have written about the need to make it transparent. A few people like Stephanie Dinkins and Catherine O'Neill have argued for making it responsive to communities and getting communities involved in the design of AI. And this goes way beyond correcting things like Google and Facebook's facial recognition system, which identifies African-American women as apes, or any of the sort of cosmetic changes that have been proposed. So what this question is trying to get at is how can we develop, we being whoever wants to be involved in solving these wicked problems, how can we develop an AI that might allow us to leverage our agency and solve some of these problems that beset us, from global warming to social inequality and so forth. And the idea here is one that I don't claim to have an answer to. I don't know the answer to this question yet. I want to find out, but I'm curious whether AI could provide a means to help us figure out how to get agency on these problems. And
that's 2 minutes.
resistance to agency is one of the characteristics of there being a wicked problem. And that's it.
Thank you, Mark. The focus on agency is clear, and yet the challenge of how to bring agency to it. The agencies that are developing these already, forgive the pun, the platform companies, are the agents of what they are bringing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's move to the next one. Linda Price Snedden, excuse me.
Snedden,
Here,
yes.
I believe. Linda, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. In a relatively short period of time, we have become disconnected from the non-human world and are immersed in one of our own construction. What can we gain if we think about how AI, AR might actually aid our reconnection to the non-human world? As an artist and a member of the Feminist Futurist Artist Collective, I must admit to feeling a little out of my element here. And I want to thank Paul and his team for bringing our voice to the new Macy. As feminist futurists, we are interested in envisioning new meta-narratives to shape our future identities and enhance human potential. We're interested in not only what is future possible, but what we may have left behind along the way. David Abrams' groundbreaking book, The Spell of the Sensuous, builds upon Merleau-Ponty's thesis of the participatory nature of perception. Perception is interaction between the perceiver and the perceived. Indigenous societies were and are intimately engaged in reciprocal relationships with nature's systems through careful observation and interaction with the environment. These cultures live in rich animistic and rich exchange, with non-human nature, mountains, flora and fauna, the weather. In a relatively short period of time, we've become disconnected from the non-human world and are immersed in one of our own construction. It is our contention that this fact has contributed to environmental and mental health crises. Can we think of ways that artificial intelligence and augmented reality might be used to re-engage our connection to the non-human world? How might this value drive game creation? What would AI interaction with members of Indigenous peoples bring to our understanding and appreciation of aspects of our humanity that we have left behind? Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I love the meta-narratives and everything that you've said. And we have had this discussion internally about the ecological world, the non-human world, and so on. You invoke AI and augmented reality, which is also interesting and very tempting because there are analog aspects of augmented reality, and bringing that combination in is lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kate Doyle. Kate?
So my question is, how does the dissection of education into disciplines set us up for technology uses and consumptions, workforces and industries, and modes of interactivity that valorize digital frameworks and dismiss analogic ones? So I'm thinking about this long established entrenchment in our educational system that is the association of subjects with specific modes of description, including language use and methodologies for study and analysis. So what I argue is that consequently the resultant disciplines are aligned with either digital or analogic frameworks, and usually it's that the sciences, and I would say sciences in quotes, sciences are aligned with the digital, whereas arts are aligned with the analogic. As the arts are considered supplementary or disposable, exactly because of their analogic qualities, so the ability to, so their sonorous qualities, musical qualities, performative, open-ended, ambiguous, potentially. And the sciences are necessary, pragmatic, and lucrative exactly for their digital ones. It's no wonder that students entering the workforce perpetuate learned divisions and contribute to and also create industries that function by way of them. So I am a professor at a large state university in New Jersey. And I'm often, I'm thinking about these things a lot because I'm watching how my students work, how they seem to categorize their modes of experience and the topics with which they are engaging in relationship to their disciplines. So I'm working within this institution and experimenting and exploring a lot how we could potentially change these things when it's so built into the bureaucratic structures of the institution itself. So this is my question today, how we can try to approach this wicked problem. At the same time, we work with the realities of how these institutions have been set up, since antiquity, and how we can negotiate those divisions that are created, the lines that are created in a new way.
Thank you, Kate. Spot on. I'd love to have you share with us in another channel the way you're comparing the digital and the analog in my broad terms, but that science is necessary, pragmatic, and lucrative, and how this bleeds into industry, which of course also bleeds into engineering and the platform companies that I've mentioned so far. So I'd love to continue this offline, as they say, and to bring in the ideas here. Great. Next, we have Daniel Friedman. Daniel, could you speak to your question?
Greetings, everybody. Thank you for the attention and for participating in this event. So before reading the question, just wanted to connect to cybernetics and note that goal-oriented systems use questions to prepare the framing for how the answer is going to look, and also for the strategies by which those goals are going to be achieved. So the question that we collaboratively wrote was, how will new affordances and challenges for cyber-physical systems be crafted and engineered for healthy, productive online teams? And with the remaining 140 seconds, just to go through some of these words and why we chose them. Affordances represent capacities for action, some of which we've always known about, others which maybe only existed in the last several years. And affordances and challenges are like two sides of the same coin. If we fail to see some critical affordances, there are going to be tools that we're not using, and that will mean a less successful mission. On the other hand, if we miss out on challenges, we're going to be blindsided by potentially disastrous outcomes. So to understand the capacities as well as the risks and the threat surfaces are two sides of the coin for whatever we're designing. Well, what are we designing for? We use the cyber physical framework to refer to things that exist in physical and in digital space. And it's really the case that all systems today are cyber physical, or at least one link away from, because whether it's going to be the supply chain or electricity, the internet, all systems are increasingly intercalated with the internet and with digital technology. And however the internet of whatever looks, it's going to be cyber physical. We use the words crafted and engineered to invoke two traditions, the craft, artisan, boutique lineage, as well as the systems engineering and the need for precision, as well as for basically participation and like guild structure in how we design these types of solutions. And then the closing with the healthy, productive online teams. Online teams are not just Slack channels, they are comment threads of people who might be even disagreeing. They're voting populaces who are taking a role in digital democracy. There are all sorts of groups, and we need to have the human in mind when we think about what healthy looks like in terms of how humans actually engage with digital systems, with cyber physical systems. We need them to be productive, as well as balancing that with so many other values that are relevant. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Daniel. I love the careful dissection and intention in all of the words you've used as articulated here, and clearly directly relevant to the broader issues of Numacy. Thank you for invoking cybernetics and goals at the beginning. It's a strong interest of mine personally about teams and the fact that we are working more and more in teams. Hello, we're sort of a team today constrained by this. So thank you very much for all of the specificity in that. Sebastian Benthal.
Hi, I wasn't expecting to speak, but I can. My question was, how can automated and interactive systems be designed for goals of environmental sustainability and the long-term viability of all we hold dear? I'm a researcher I'm in my law. I work on things like AI regulation, but I don't work on this topic. I brought up this topic because of the urgency implied by the prompt and the recent, UN task force that has been declaring that climate change really is the urgent problem. I don't know it's a big problem and bigger than AI, but AI does have a contributing factor to the climate change and also can be part of the solution to environmental sustainability. There's quite a bit of work now on green AI systems, trying to figure out what it would look like, taking into account the environmental cost of, say, large scale natural language processing systems. So I was just raising the question to put it on the radar and see if anybody else had ideas.
Thanks, Sebastian. And I didn't mean to ambush you. I'm sorry if the intention wasn't clear. Again, environment is a topic, automated and interactive topic, systems part of it. And I love the phrase, all that we hold dear. That was one of the reasons to ask you to be last. All of these questions are about all that we hold dear. So thank you for that. Damian Chapman. Damian, this actually is the last.
Hello. So my urgent question was, how can design reimagine and enable learning and trust in humans to counter increasingly intrusive IA, artificial intelligence? And I was interested in this from the perspective of design being a creative and innovative opportunity. I was thinking through making, through interaction, and how dialogue with materials, with each other, can build a sense of trust repair. And I was interested in the words of Ranulph Glanville saying that design is about bringing that which we don't have into being. And it always involves this moving from not knowing to knowing. But it's also a process of creating something, which we can then explain as if it were part of a logical process. So we can give it a causality. But it doesn't have that causality as we make it. The causality is a post-rationalization. So I was interested in how we move from mistrust and mistrusted systems through opaque systems to transform to an interactive and open process of learning, and reconsidering how through developmental culture we can build learning, and from that human requirement of trust back into our culture.
Thank you, Damian. Eve, you have your hand up.
Yeah, because there's a couple of questions in the chat box.
Okay.
One is from Igor Perko. Can we switch from data collecting to data sharing concepts, making the data producers data owners? What are the implications for the AI sensing capacity and for the society as such? So I don't know, do you want people to address that, or do you want there's another question in the chat box also.
Why don't you bring up the second question, then I'll close with Damian, and then we'll ask if some of the advisory council want to make a comment, and then we'll open it up for discussion. But let's throw these in now. I think it's good. Eve. What was the other one you had?
So the other one from Bruno is, could we put AI systems to work recycling the waste of the human technician at the molecular level?
It's a lovely thought.
Yeah.
Would that it were so. Yes. Yes, as Heinz would call that, it's an undecidable question because there's no clear answer. But back to you, Damian, for just a moment. Thank you for bringing design into this explicitly, which of course is close to my heart and to many of the people here and on the close-in conversations that we're having. The increasingly intrusive AI and how we build trust is a very, very difficult and human emotional challenge here, which I'm not sure about, but I appreciate you raising it. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Deborah Forster is a member of our advisory council. Deborah, I know that I may be springing this on you, but would you be willing to make a few comments now? Not hearing you. I know that you're here.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can
Yeah,
hear you.
yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I think that for me personally, when I started to deal with cybernetics and systems in general, I was studying animal behavior, specifically baboons in the wild. And part of what I was dealing with is how do you explore a system, a complex system, where you cannot, maybe you could guess at a purpose, but you could not really tell what a purpose is or an intention at the outset. And in fact, are there ways to understand complex systems without having to attribute purpose at the beginning, so that you could actually figure out if there is a discernible purpose as a result of your analysis? So part of my, and especially as we're building artificial systems, that may become a more and more relevant consideration, either as an affordance or challenge, as some of you have said. So when I think about, so that's one thing, is purpose. The other comment I would make is that, and Paul and I have had extensive exchanges about this over the last few months, is analog and digital are kind of slippery things, especially when you look at biological systems. And if you think about the on-off of a neuron, then there is a strong, right, that's where digital came into being, right? If we look at the old Macy's and Pitts and McCullough's kind of attempt to look at neuron behavior. So I feel like those two tensions, purpose and digital versus analog, are really nice juxtapositions to have to engage with.
Thank you, Deborah. I've enjoyed all the conversations. Deborah's one of the many that I've had one-on-one conversations with, and also been engaged in some small group presentations. And I love that you bring this primatologist baboon point of view and the analog nature of the world to it. And I also am fascinated by this tension, but don't let me dwell on that. I don't see Andy Pickering in the audience. Andy, are you here? I thought you would be coming, but perhaps.
Yeah, I'm here.
You are here. I didn't see your name.
I'm ARP.
ARP. I see. ARP 205.
Yeah,
So
I don't know why I'm there.
You're hiding in the digital moniker there. So great. I'm glad I double checked. Andy, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being on the advisory council. What would be your reflections at this point?
All right. That was an extremely interesting bunch of questions to start off with. There's tons of things to talk about there. I thought it might be useful to add a few remarks which kind of carry on the basic line of thought in a certain direction, which is to try and make it more concrete, if you like. I understood the subtext for this meeting to be, can we imagine some sort of cybernetic AI device set up that could somehow challenge and go beyond conventional AI? That seems to be the fantasy. Can cybernetics do something here? After a long chain of thought, I arrived at the obvious answer, which is that what we need are kind of conversational machines. I know you'll like this, Paul, right? Machines that we can talk to in a non-linear fashion. Machines that can help us and surprise us, rather than just replying in a kind of linear question and answer format. It's these machines that I wanted to kind of think about a bit, or put on the agenda for maybe future meetings, something like that. And it's worth remembering that the original Macy meetings were, apart from anything else, technical. People made technical arguments about very characteristic cybernetic machines that they built. So it can be, what can we say about conversational machines? It sounds like a bit of a forlorn hope trying to have a conversation with a machine. But actually, of course, I can think of a lot of models for machines like that in the history of cybernetics. I think basically about the teaching machines that Gordon Pask worked on for almost all of his life. Machines that challenged learners and adapted to their responses in a kind of back and forth that I call a dance of agency. And there's a whole tradition of these machines running up to the present, I think, including, of course, Paul Pangara's thought sticker from the late 70s, Bernard Scott's educational technology, Stephen Willett's metafilter from 1973 in the art world, Nicholas Negroponte's architecture machine. Maybe we could even throw in Stafford Beer's viable system model and the disintegration process. These strike me as being kind of concrete examples, seeds that could grow into a more imaginative challenge to Google, etc., and that might deserve thinking about today or in a later meeting, especially since we have Pangara. We can get him to explain how these machines work, which is often been a puzzle to me. I'd love to hear more about that, and also about the limitations of these machines. Why aren't they flourishing in the world today? What remains to be done on this kind of machine programming front? That's a way of making the discussion more concrete. And as a last point, I could just add that this sort of discussion, it needs to have a technical dimension. We need to think about, what are these machines and devices actually doing? But it shouldn't be purely technical. If we had some kind of concrete examples of cybernetic AI to keep in mind, we could perhaps also think more clearly about what the big problems in the world are and how cybernetics might be useful in helping us to address them. That's my line of thought.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much.
Okay.
A beautiful bringing all together in lots of ways. I feel very much the desire to make these concrete, and you'll read as you have, and others may review in the documents we're producing, that these examples, these counterexamples, these alternatives to AI, be concrete, be design patterns and prototypes and a dissection of what happened before and an illumination of what Pask's machines or Willett's machines or even the VSM from Beer could be. It's a beautiful synthesis that you brought together. I appreciate very much. Thanks. Thanks for being here, Andy. Let's open it up to broad discussion now. And we have most of the remainder of the time. We planned on running for 90 minutes. Those who wish to stay, we can go a little earlier, of course. But the key idea is to now bring ideas forward. So Eve, if you have any other questions you want to bring up, if I see the chat is very active and a bit daunting. If others want to raise their hand, I can call on you serially, as you prefer. Who would like to speak?
Jamie Rose had what seems like an apt comment that deserves some exploration. There seems a tacit presumption all AI designers are ethical and high-minded to greatest benefit for the most people, and that is not the case. Well, and that's actually related to a comment I put in the chat box, which was that, yeah, I mean, the idea of unintended purposes, and that you can actually have initial purposes that are not malign, but the consequences could still be.
Yes. First to Jamie, I don't think there's an assumption here that AI designers are ethical and high-minded. Some presumably are, but I don't hear that assumption here. And surely how it ends up is neither ethical nor high-minded. Again, we won't Go ahead.
In retort to that, I was listening to most of the 6 presentations and thoughts, and there seemed to be a presumption of any outputs that were coming from AI decision making or recommendations would be oriented towards the betterment of humanity generally, and so there we ought to be just openly accept them unquestioningly. So that's where I was coming with that concern.
Yeah, I think we share that concern, and I didn't hear that utopian view in the questions from here. And of course, the industry itself is questioning itself. Not really, but it's throwing a lot of money toward so-called ethical organizations to help them consider what are the ethical issues. And we put $1 billion over here, so surely we care about OpenAI and all kinds of things like that. So I think there's broad agreement, Jamie, that's an issue too. Again, surely we're ethical. Are we ethicists? I'm not sure. That could be a branch. If people want to bring that to the New Macy Initiative, I would love to have that be a hub of other conversations. Here, the question is,
if I may add just one little side topic, and this is something that I had mentioned in some private conversations, is that I'm not particularly sure, being a biologist, I'm not particularly happy with the architecture of AI systems where hardware and software are considered separate entities and inert to each other, where living systems are not formed that way. And so there's an insensitivity where the AI systems themselves are not adaptive to changing needs and proprieties as living systems are. So that's a correlated issue.
Again, agree. And I think the cyberneticians would largely agree, if not entirely agree. Thanks for your comment, Jamie.
Yes.
Just quickly, Daniel Friedman is asking the ethical grounding for cybernetics. I can only recommend Heinz von Forster's paper, Ethics and Second Order Cybernetics, and I think that will answer that question.
Jump back a second, Paul, to Deborah's observation about purpose. I think there's an interesting connection to that and Kant's comment on art, which he at one point calls observing purposiveness without purpose, which sounds contradictory, but I think what he's trying to talk about is observing something that shows characteristics of purpose, but you don't know yet what that purpose may be. And that seems to me to be kind of an intrinsically cybernetic process. And I think that's maybe where art also has something to contribute to this dialogue.
We agree completely, if I can use not the royal we, but the conversations we've been having, and Mark has been part of these as well, to bring in art and media and as broad a swath as possible. Kate Doyle spoke earlier, she's a musicologist, etc. The full experience of being human is what we want to make sure we are not crashing against and obliterating with whatever technology we bring. And indeed, the resonance across the digital and the analog is something that we're looking for in general per the diagram. Thank you for that.
There were some questions from Miguel Martin and Adler Jorge on waves and the idea of the first big wave of AI and how that might depend on centralization and scale.
They're interspersed. I saw it go by, but Miguel or Adler, can you articulate? I mean, we've had a couple of big waves of AI, right? It depends on how you want to count. Miguel, would you like to comment, please?
So my concern is that at this point it's a juggernaut that's too hard to stop, and I take a little bit of inspiration from what's happening in the decentralized finance world. I think this is all part of this continuous wave in technology that's happened throughout the course of computing, which is you centralize, you decentralize, you centralize, you decentralize. It keeps on happening over and over again. we're going to go beyond the cloud at some point soon. And so I think if the data becomes decentralized, then it automatically de-inflates the power of a Facebook or a Google or a Microsoft to be able to pull off these extremely powerful AI models. If the centralization continues, then I think the power of AI by its nature is that it will exponentially increase in power, at which point then at some point we may not even have any control over it.
Thank you, Miguel. Is it inevitable that the data continue to be centralized and always be centralized? Is anyone able to comment on that?
Maybe I can comment on that. Yeah.
Igor, is that you?
Mm-hmm.
Please go ahead.
Currently the trend is developing data lakes, which do enable the development of artificial intelligence as the organizations, basically companies, it's imagined they should be. And they actually have the control over the data. So I think this is one of the points where this should be discontinued. And this is why I proposed data collecting with data sharing, a concept where the power is set from the collectors of the data to the basically people who are producing the data, and that's distributed.
Igor, you're coming and going a little bit. Could you repeat the last sentence again, closer to the mic, just the last sentence?
Well, the difference between data collecting and data sharing is the power is not centralized, but it's basically whether the data should be available for artificial intelligence to reason upon to the data producers who are many, and that means distributed.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think that's clear. Adrian, you have your hand up.
Yes, as we engineer the AI into our digital twin, maybe a self-sovereign digital twin, then we can have separate relationships with each of the decentralized sources of information.
So you're using some code words there. If you can throw things in the chat, I don't know if that's possible, about self-sovereign, that would be helpful. But it sounds like you think there's hope here. Maybe we can talk offline and we can feed some of these ideas into a later conversation. I think Adrian's probably good. Andy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about big data. I was trying to think about kind of cybernetic AI and what kind of data would it draw on. And the first thing you think of is, you know, it'd be the same kind of big data that somebody like Google uses in recommendation engines or something like that. And then again, and the phrase that went through my mind was shallow data. Maybe instead of trying to, know everything that's happened everywhere for all time and extrapolate that forward, you could just say, what did the last 10 people do, right? And then, every time somebody acts, the database changes, which would be a great way of kind of creating new patterns, right? The patterns in cybernetic AI would change much more rapidly with shallow data than big data, because obviously we got no chance to get our hands on big data anyway. It's monopolized by Google. That was my thought.
Again, you're implying hope. That there is hope. I love the idea of shallow data. Let's also pick that up. Let's pick that up again. Claudia.
Yeah, I thought it's actually quite useful that Miguel raised the idea of the blockchain as a technology that might contribute to decentralization, because there are so huge questions about this. And just to emphasize that could probably be a point of discussion. And there's also philosophical discussion about this, because it seems to be, as at least someone like Catherine Malabou would discuss this now in the context of a technology that enables anarcho-capitalism on the one hand. This is what Google and Facebook and so on using, versus a decentralized system that could actually enable mutual aid, ideas of mutual aid again. So return to ideas of anarchy that are quite different from this kind of anarcho-capitalism that we are facing with and dealing with current AI systems.
Thank you, Claudia. If any of those references are handy, if you could add them to the chat, if you think relevant, that would be wonderful. Eve, did you want to come in with some other comments here?
Well, I see that Lowell Christie has his hand up, and that it was his comment in the chat box I wanted to point to, talking about the idea of natural and collective intelligence. And I think that also links to this question of, top down versus bottom up. So.
Okay, Lowell, are you ready for that? And then we'll come back to Nate, if that's okay.
Douglas Engelbart gave us some indication of how to address this really important issue, and thank you, Paul and group, for doing this. He looked at the world in terms of an equation, an interface. He created the mouse hypertext windows to begin with, but his real insights have never been capitalized upon, which is how do you develop collective intelligence on the human side, on the organization of human intelligence. And what Gregory Bateson said is we must learn from the mind of nature, because digital is not just digital analog. It is something more in nature in terms of how we model the world and understand the world. So there are two people out there, Engelbart and Bateson, that give the natural and collective intelligence side of the asymmetric equation between AI, ML, machine learning, and natural and collective intelligence. I think that's be worthy of our endeavoring on that.
And
Thank you, Lowell.
to link
Yes.
a couple more comments from the chat box, was several comments about artists and supporting artists and the fact that, they don't get supported. So yeah, that may be another dimension to supporting collective intelligence, is to making sure that artists get support.
Great. Thank you, Lowell.
Just the one aspect of aesthetics. Aesthetics is the organization of something beautiful in good order. And that's what we're missing on the human side of the equation.
Very nice. We had a request, Lowell, in the chat for references on collective intelligence, if you have some, especially from Bateson and Engelbart.
Will do.
If you could put them in chat. Thank you very much. Nate, you've been patient. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just seeing a rising theme in the interactions so far, and I certainly don't have any kind of thing to elaborate on that. But really, what I wanted to speak to is the dichotomy between the rising need for collective data as it pertains to interactions and how that's been corporatized on a private level, through things like Google and Alexa and things like that, but also the dichotomy between that and the need to use that data to quantize that data in a way that benefits a universal AI platform that other people can benefit from a decentralized standpoint, even to where it benefits folks like, artists and people that are more focused on the collective mindset that we don't necessarily associate a capitalist monetary value to, but can still contribute to society in that way. So anyways, I wondered what your thoughts were on that, what other people's thoughts were on that. So thanks.
Let's bring that into the discussion. Would anyone like to respond to exactly what Nate said? It's a little dangerous to veer off here. Claire, you'll be next. I agree in general, the collective data issue and the personal data issue. This is something that Adrian, I think, was referring to, and perhaps has some references as well to put in the chat, or we can follow up later with an email to everyone, which we usually do, to tell you how to reach the recording and the save chat from this. I don't have any further comments on that right now. Anyone else on that topic, on Nate's topic? Okay, we can always come back. Claire.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the art piece just because it's, and we were talking about funding, and just to distinguish, art is funded, but it's the participatory kind of art. So the community level art that is barely funded and at every single level. And that's the distinction I wanted to make. I think art and the way that it is supported often is supported in a, like the commodification of art is very much the theme of how things are funded in the arts. But when it comes to, yeah, that sort of collective learning through art, and yeah, and there's a whole continuum that fits onto, but I just wanted to make that distinguishment because I actually think it gets confused. It's nothing against the way that art, like the kind of art that is being produced and funded. It's just that when that is where all of the resourcing goes, it skews how we even think about the arts. So yeah, just to say that, and very little is like that distinction isn't very well made in sort of social generally. So thanks.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. Other comments are interrelated in the chat. Again, too many to interweave, but Jude Lombardi makes the distinction between collecting and sharing and the importance of considering the language that we use in these regards. Kate.
So Carolyn just brought up the NFTs, and I was just about to mention that this in relationship to the comments about blockchain and this new trend in monetizing art practices where NFTs are sold. And so I was trying to formulate a kind of question or comment about the thread of discussion we've had about art making practices in general, and in relationship to monetizing practices, but also education. I think a lot about art and the relationship of unknowing and art being used for different purposes. So being used from an educational standpoint. And Paul, you had mentioned at the very beginning of this discussion that we could take advantage of the analogic frameworks that are inherent in art and media already. So how do we do that? How can we take advantage of that? From my standpoint, I think a lot about how can we use art to think about analogic frameworks and specifically uncertainty, which I think it may be the question you used, Paul, or at least it's in the digital analogic graphic. So uncertainty or unknowing, how can art help us to access resistance against these kind of this boundary creation that's created, as I mentioned, in education systems, which I made sort of analogous to digital frameworks. So how can art help us to educate ourselves to think about boundaries differently, boundaries of form, boundaries of knowledge, and the dissection of things from a variety of standpoints. And this is where I found Damian's question really intriguing, because Damian, you brought up this idea of trust. What is the relationship of knowing and trust and ownership and trust in relation to art making practices? So that's just something that I think might be fruitful to think about further.
Yes, thank you, Kate. The whole idea of the culture of digital, which of course Joe Weizenbaum, I happen to be reading this recent translation of some of his work in German. He's of course famous for Computer Power and Human Reason, but he spent a lot of time late in his life in Germany, and these are translations of his work, and the introduction alone is fantastic. And of course he wrote in the 70s about the kinds of hackers, tech folks, I was among them as an undergrad, partly in a computer science department, and how their whole way of thinking caused a way of programming, which pervade a way of making digital come out in the world. And as I recall in Weizenbaum's Computer Power and Human Reason, he contrasts cultures. You know, we're not talking snow here, but it's a bit of how do we think about things and how can we come back to our analog roots is the way I like to put it. Indulge me a minute, I have to read this one quote from Weizenbaum, which is, quote, "Since we do not now have any ways of making computers wise, we ought not now to give computers tasks that demand wisdom." And I suppose a recommendation engine doesn't demand wisdom for telling you where to buy pizza, but many, many, many applications of AI do demand wisdom when they're making social judgments, racial judgments, economic judgments, and therefore human judgments requiring wisdom about individual people. Guilherme.
Hello. Well, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Are you listening to me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for promoting all of this. It's amazing. It's amazing what you're doing, right? I have general comments. I am a generalist, right? So I have general comments. The first one is the new Macy role, right? Is prepare a path for questioning technology. In the age of complete absence of question, the complete absence of question is today obscured by technological remedies, celebrated by transhumanists, geoengineering guys, human enhancement guys, eco-modernists, etc. Right? My second comment, I'm very brief. We have an urgent task right now. Urgent task. It's debunk and attack violently the guys who want to construct, the AI guys that want to propose or construct a foundational model based upon neural networks and machine learning. They're trying to offer neural networks and machine learning as foundational models for everything related to AI. This is very dangerous. We need to attack them right now. So who is attacking? There are some guys like Pierre Levy that want to rescue symbolic AI. There are people in industry. IBM is talking about something called neural symbolic AI, right? I don't know if this is the right path. I don't know. I don't have the answers, but we need to question anytime right now, and we have to attack the guys who want to create a foundational model based upon neural networks and machine learning. This is very dangerous. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Guilherme. Thank you for making your comments. Guilherme is a close colleague of many years and also on our advisory council. Thank you for coming. Let's do a couple of more questions, and then I'd like to turn to Michael, who will show us the Miro Board and show us the accumulation of ideas that have occurred in the Miro Board. The link is recently there again if you want to go there on your own. And then we'll try a little wrap-up, coalescence, try to see what our closing ideas might be, and also point toward a couple of events to be arranged in October, smaller groups focusing on subsets of all of the different topics that have come up today. And there'll be ways of eliciting your involvement in that as well. Damian, you had a short question, comment?
Yeah, I was interested in coming back to this idea of a safe space to fail whilst learning. But I think this is so interesting from the notion of coming from the idea that you teach something in hoping that students regurgitate that back, moving that out to the way that you're hoping that you're facilitating groups of people to learn new ways of making sense of their ideas, their experiences. And I think that for me is the optimism here. I don't think it's a given under something that is over, because through the arts, through the humanities, through the sciences, I think there is great invention. But I think sometimes what lacks is the confidence to fail in that making process, because we measure by A's and A stars and distinctions, rather than the creative opportunities and the learning that goes in that place. So that's where I think that maybe rethinking how that place of, or that language around failure be reshaped, and also how the place of learning be given more opportunity for people to establish who they might be and their ways of developing language to form and build forwards, if that makes sense.
Beautiful, Damian, thank you. Two more, Eve and then Klaus, and then I'd like to ask Michael to show us the Miro board and to begin to coalesce and maybe see where our common ideas are here.
Paul, we
Eve?
also have a comment in the chat from Philip Beasley that you might want to look at.
I can look at that.
Okay. I just
although
wanted to
go
point
ahead,
out
Eve.
that yeah, so there's been some discussion in the chat about the NFT non-fungible tokens and some resources offered. But I just wondered if anybody wanted to offer any initial clarification about some of the questions about the no resale commission options, etc.
Just to briefly speak to that,
yeah,
this is programmable interactions with value. So one can specify tokenomics that are totally arbitrary. We shouldn't feel limited to what exists today or yesterday. One can design digital systems that are fungible, non-fungible, anywhere in between with any kind of parameters they want. How to get other people to value it, I mean, how to get people to value art has always been the question, but we're certainly not limited to the forms we see today.
This could be a subtopic that we might want to return to. Should we move to Klaus then, and then afterwards ask Michael to give us a review of the Miro board? Klaus, welcome.
Well, I want to make a few comments. Let's start with AI, the name of AI. When we design technology that we say is intelligence, we submit our own intelligence to the superior artificial intelligence. That is a big mistake. I appreciate Paul's suggestion. One should maybe look at wisdom. Now, I'm not so sure how we can quantify this or what that all means, but I think it is a big mistake to attribute intelligence to machines that we design. They expand, if you want, the range of human intelligence, but not replace it. The second point is that I think we make a mistake in constantly, and not really a mistake, but it is kind of not enough to talk about the human-machine interaction, the question of ethics, et cetera, et cetera. The point is actually that, and I think who raised the issue, or Claire raised the issue of funding. Well, who pays for all of this? The point is actually that I think the people that develop artificial intelligent machines, supposedly intelligent, are really supporting big industry, big government, big institutions that take over basically society in a massive way. And we focus on minor things when the bigger issues are that we are increasingly programmed in support of big machineries. And I think centralization and decentralization is an issue, but this deals only with control. But this is already not centralized, but it is already delegated to machines when whole industries are basically run on algorithms. And they are not intelligence, they have a different kind of purpose. And I think we should really look at what we do unintentionally, supporting machines that in the end ruin really our lives.
Thank you, Klaus. Agree completely. Michael, shall we move to you and begin to coalesce and find a way toward some conclusions?
Yes. I'll post in the chat right now the link to the Miro board again, just in case, because the chat has been very alive in this meeting, which is fantastic. So currently, we have the 6 boards that are have had lots of input into them, which is fantastic. Relating to the 6 questions that we began with. I'm not sharing my screen, am I?
Not yet. No, I was going.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Here we go. Great.
Is that better?
Yes. Excellent.
So we had our original 6 questions, and we've had a good amount of participation, ideas, and follow-up questions that fall into these original 6 categories we had. And we've also opened up a space for a lot of new questions. And so we appreciate everybody's input in the new questions. And in our scratch board area, we've also had quite a lot of participation in expanding on the ideas brought up here. Paul, what I would like to do is to have a quick vote. Anybody who's in Miro can click on things that they feel are pertinent. We're not going to necessarily decide what the next meeting is going to be about right now, but it'll just help us have a better idea of the next direction.
It's a lovely idea. Can you give us a quick review of how to vote quickly for those who are new to Miro?
So once I open the voting session, there will be 5 minutes and each person gets 10 votes, and you can just click on anything that you're interested in, whether it's one of these 6 questions that maybe was very, you feel is like very pertinent. Maybe it's a particular sticky note. It can really be anything within this area. Actually, I need to expand it because we've added so much here. Is that clear enough, Paul?
Yes, I think so. So again, you'd have to click on the link to the Miro board. That will bring it up in a browser on your machine. And then as you watch, you'll see the voting capacity come up. Let's leave you sharing for a moment, Michael. Larry, might you be ready now to make some closing comments, some coalescing comments, and then I'll ask Fred to say a word or two, and then we'll end. We may run a little beyond 1:30. I apologize, or half past. Larry, please.
Well, first, thank you very much, Paul, for putting this together. It's been really enjoyable for the last year, interacting with you and the entire group. It's hard to know where to start with this. I think one place to start is there was a comment made, are we too far along on our current track to suddenly switch tracks? And I think that's an important question. It was mentioned that part of the current track we're on involves our entire society. Some mentioned, the ambiguous term capitalism. Certainly that plays an effect here. There's quite a bit of talk about blockchain and things related to that, and how that's an example of something that's gone off in a little different direction than what we had before, with potential implications. But no one's thinking about, to me, no one's thinking really about what the real implications of that are, and what are the implications of that in our current situation. I think that where cybernetics has something to offer, it is in looking at some of the concepts and the ideas that have been mentioned throughout the session today. I mean, how do we think about agency or the digital analog connection, participation, affordances, Online teams. How do we think about that? Andy mentioned conversational machines. He also mentioned, in somewhat reluctantly, I felt, Stafford Beer's Syntegration. And I think there's, in some of these cybernetic ideas that are still around and still being talked about, there might be an inkling of something that we could move toward. In the case of syntegration, for me, it's not so much the process as it is the structure. And how can we think about how we structure our interactions with each other, whether in or through machines? And personally, I'm not sure I want to have a conversation with a machine, but I certainly need some way to connect with people in a better way than we currently have, including this medium here. And that's where the idea, at least, of conversation might become very important. So those are just a few thoughts.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it very much. I don't know if anyone has a question about Miro. Michael, are you getting any response for those in Miro? I don't want to distract from the real-time face-to-face such as it is here, but let us know.
I haven't yet started the vote. Would you like me to open the vote
Okay.
now?
Yes, I apologize. Yes, please open the vote for anyone who's there. Sorry, that wasn't clear. Claudia.
Yeah, I thought I bring back the attention maybe to the comment Philip Beasley made in the chat.
Thank you.
And he is suggesting what looks like, if I summarize, because a bit longer, but I mean, everyone has the opportunity to save the chat, I believe. It would be a good idea to do that. So he brings in a suggestion. There are a number of keywords that drift, displacement, instability. So there seems to be an idea that the systems could be challenged through art through this kind of displacement. Maybe it's a kind of introduction of noise. So I think there are a lot of interesting ideas, and the question about what the methodologies for this are, and whether Pask's ideas could be useful in this context. And he also mentions Abby Warburg's Mimosine model, which might be another way to look at this. So yeah, I think it might be really interesting to look at the methodologies, past methodologies in terms of displacement. Yeah, I think so.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much. We're coming to time. I would like to be respectful for those who won't stay much longer. I'd like to, in a moment, ask Fred Steyer to make a few comments, and then we will close. I will hang if people want to keep talking. I'm very happy and interested in doing that for a brief period of time. Let me remind everyone that we will send to those who were on the registration list for this a follow-up, which will include the saved chat that you've seen. You can save it yourself, by the way. You find the three little dots to the right of the chat where you type in. And also the video for the session will be on the ASC main site. We also invite any of you who wish to join the ASC. The last slide of that slide deck has a link to that. You can also find it on the website easily enough, learn about joining the ASC and so on. We thank you all for coming. And Fred, let me give you the next to last word.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. And thanks, Paul, for setting this up, and thank everyone for joining, all 99 of us that have been here. One thing that has emerged for me with this conversation is that it is a conversation. And I think, Paul, one of the things that you did so skillfully is create the possibility to switch from New Macy meetings to New Macy conversations. in the sense of, as Heinz von Förster has always spoken about, conversa in the sense of turning with. And it's that withness that has become so important. And what we've done is to really set up possibilities for continuing this conversation. There's an interesting comment in the chat. So one of the things, just as a preface to how I was going to wrap up this, is part of what we're inviting everyone to do is to be fully present with each other, which on Zoom can be somewhat challenging, whether you're in Zoom through Eventbrite or whatever. And so having these multiple channels open to us, the chat, the Miro board, the face-to-face on Zoom, can be both opening up possibilities for different forms of interaction, but also somewhat challenging. And Daniel, I noted that you posted how this can be a kind of overload on us, although you posted that in the chat, which is in itself a wonderful irony, right? That, so how to recognize what these different design spaces open up for, and what does it mean to converse with each other in multiple spaces at the same time? So this was somewhat intentional. At the same time, it's also an interesting challenge for us to think about as we move forward. But the idea of moving from meetings to conversations becomes so important. An additional thought with this, since we talked about an Andy Picker, you mentioned the idea of conversational machines, and Larry, you called attention to this. I would ask people to know how you think that you're speaking to me as a human rather than a machine. Am I operating out of a script? And the answer is, I don't know. Maybe thinking about the importance of ambiguity here becomes something to think about moving forward. So thanks so much, Paul, for setting this up.
Thank you, Fred, and thanks for being involved all along. I'd like to give a final opportunity for anyone who has not spoken, who would like to make a remark before we close. And also I'll put my email in the chat in the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with me. Anyone who hasn't spoken would like to make a remark? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Again, I'll hang. Thanks to all who've come and contributed, and we hope to see you again. Thanks so much. Have a great day.